We are on day 18 of our Advent reflections, and today we're turning to 1 Corinthians, and we're looking at a church that have actually seemed to push Jesus out of the table, out of the Lord's Supper, and Paul is calling them out on what they're doing. So it's 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and it's verses 17 to 22. And I was thinking about the Lord's Supper, and I was thinking how beautiful it has been that we have been able to share communion at the 9:30 service. It's a great thing to be able to do that together in this time. But I think it has been quite different. We've been using these little communion cups, and you basically peel the lid and you get your wafer, and then there's your little cup with your juice in it. And that is very different to maybe the way that we've been used to doing things. And it's very, very different to the big meals that maybe we used to have after church sometimes before this pandemic, and beautiful meals where everybody would bring something. We'd have Danny's amazing Jamaican food, we'd have home-baked cakes, we'd have people who'd forgotten rushing out to the hills across the road or whichever shop they can find to bring something to the table, and we'd all share together and eat. And we all miss that, I'm sure we do. I know I do. I cannot wait until we can do that together again. In this passage, I think when we look at it, this is what this meal is meant to be. It's meant to be everybody sharing together, remembering Jesus, and just being able to spend time being united in Jesus and with each other. And what has happened is very different. There's actually divisions. It's actually become more about the social element of that meal. People are being greedy. People are not sharing what they've had. The rich are eating, and the poor that come are left with very little. If we turn to verse 21, it says this: "For when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing?" You know, very, very harsh words, but this is basically it. It's almost like part of the church have got that big shared meal that we talked about that maybe we used to having. They've got all that food, they're feasting, and the rest of the church have, as nice as it has been, our little cups, and they're finishing and they're saying, I'm still hungry. And actually Jesus is dishonored by the way that they are doing this. They're not remembering Jesus, and they're not caring and sharing for each other. So what can this teach us, especially in this time? I think it's Advent, we're preparing for Christmas, but we're not doing these big shared meals together. So what can we take from this right now? Well, I think as we prepare for Christmas Day, most of us, in one way or another, will be having a meal as we celebrate Jesus' birth. And what Paul goes on to say in this passage when he thinks about the Lord's Supper is about examining yourself before you come to the Lord's table. And I think one thing we could do, although we can't look at those big shared meals and maybe how we do that differently, I think one thing we could do is examine ourselves today. Just ask God to call out, is there anything, as I look forward to sharing this meal on Christmas Day, is there anything where I am actually causing any disunity? Or is there anything that I am doing where I'm not sharing with others in church in the way that I know you call me to? Where I'm not bringing unity to church in the way that I know you want me to? So we could all just ask God to speak to us today about ways in which we read this story, and maybe there's some things we do that actually God wants to tell us today, and see what we can do to be in unity, to make sure we're all sharing and mixing together in the ways that we can under current guidelines, but calling each other and seeing how each other are doing and seeing what each other needs. Yes, we can't share those big meals, but we can be sharing life together in the ways that we can. So let's just ask God to speak to us and see if there's anything as we examine ourselves that we can do to prepare for this meal of Christmas and just ensure we are a church that is in unity with Jesus and with each other. And the second thing, I think they've become so caught up in the social element of this meal that they'd forgotten Jesus, that actually Paul says they weren't even practicing the Lord's Supper anymore. And I think as we think forward to Christmas, and you might be thinking, well, this isn't really the big issue this Christmas because it's all going to be so simple. I'm not having this huge meal with lots of people. It's all going to be very, very different. But there might still be a lot of distractions in terms of the social element of Christmas. I know for a lot of families, it's really tricky at the moment working out how we do these 3 families in these 5 days. Which 3 families, if you're from a bigger family, are we spending time with, and how are we working that out and doing that well? And it might be causing tensions in families. There might be lots of questions and concerns how this is all going to work out. And I think as we look at this Lord's Supper, we look at the people that had got caught up in the social element and had forgotten Jesus. I think the call for us is, as we look to that meal we're going to share with whoever we are with, that we can think about how we ensure we keep Jesus' space at that table, because they had pushed him out. So this Christmas, as we think to celebrate Jesus' birth, let's make that at the centre. Let's make Jesus at the centre and think about that first, and make space for him first in our hearts, in our homes, and make sure that the social element doesn't take over. Although we know as the people of God, I do believe we are meant to share food together and to feast and have a good time. So we can still do all that, but let's keep Jesus at the centre of all of that. So I pray you have a blessed day as you just open up to God and you ask Jesus to come in and take centre stage in your preparations for Christmas.